This lesson is lesson 10.3, decimal fractions, multiplying tenths by tenths. So in this lesson, we're going to be specifically looking at what happens when we multiply one decimal fraction by another decimal fraction. So I'm going to use this page here just to kind of highlight a few things, some things that I think maybe we could use as our success criteria. One of those things is to understand that when multiplying two numbers involving only tenths, we'll never create a product greater than 1. Now, I'm going to just show you what that means. We've got even our largest of tenths numbers, 9 tenths times 9 tenths. When we multiply those two together, you guys might already know that 9 times 9 is 81. Well, 9 tenths times 9 tenths equals 81 hundredths. I could show that in terms of a fraction really quickly. And we could write out like this: 9 tenths times 9 tenths equals 81 over 100. Well, we can tell if the numerator is larger than the denominator, then the number is greater than 1. So you can see that this proves that whenever you multiply two decimal fractions together that are less than 1, you'll never have a product greater than 1. The next key thing is that when we use a hundredth square to model a multiplication of two decimal fractions as in tenths, that we're going to be able to use that as a model to show what the answer really should be. We may have just a second ago seen how that works just in mathematical form, but let's take a look at it if we were to use a hundredth frame. Let's use this model really quickly to show that same math problem. 9 tenths times 9 tenths. This is a square with 100 cubes in it, or 100 squares in it. And if we were to look at each one of these rows, we have 1/10. And if we count out 9 tenths, we would come all the way up to this line right here. Notice what I did. I drew a line all the way across. We can't go any higher than that. Any higher than that would be one whole. Same with the stuff on this bottom side, this bottom axis. We've got, if we counted these out going up and down, we have 10 rows. Each row is 1/10. Here's where 9 tenths is. We would want to only count the things that are where this circle is. And if we did count them up, we would end up with 81 hundredths that would be covered up. 81 hundredths of this would be covered. The final part to this, which may be another key to helping us understand this, is you'll use a known multiplication fact, such as 8 times 4, to calculate 8 tenths times 4 tenths, and recognize that 8 tenths is 1/10 of 4 tenths and 1/10 of 4. So the product is 8 tenths times 4 tenths will be 1/100th, the product of 1/10 times 1/10 of 32. Wow, that sounds very complicated, but let's take a look at what each one of these is saying. This is 1/10 of 8, and this number here, this other part, is 1/10 of 4. So if we wanted to, we could keep the 1/10ths together, multiply those parts, and multiply the whole numbers that we're more familiar with. 4 times 8 is 32. 1/10 times 1/10 is 1/100th. So 32 times 1/100th is 32 hundredths. You can see how that's written as a fraction, or we can write it out like this: 32 hundredths. It's not a lot to kind of help on this particular slide, other than to show you what things we might be doing in this lesson for the day. One more thing that I like to do, that I think of, is I just take these as whole numbers to multiply times each other. I take 5 times 4. I get 20. And then when I have decimal points, what I have to decide is how many places over to the left of what would have typically been where my decimal place could be placed. How many decimal point values are there on either both of these numbers combined? So I can see 1 here and I can see 1 here for a total of 2. So move over 1 and 2 for my decimal point right there. Okay, it'll work the same way as we move into multiplying by 100ths or 1000ths, but for today, let's work on mastering 1/10. Okay, so 8 times 3, 24. Move my decimal point from where we might typically think of it has 2 places. Decimal point goes right there with a 0 in front. 8/10 times 3/10 is 24 hundredths. Let's try this one. Let's just do this one a little bit differently. Let's change this one into a fraction where we look at this number has 9/10 times 5/10 in a little bit different way. Now, 9 times 5 is 45, and then 10 times 10 is 100th. The reason for our practice earlier this year, writing fractions into decimal fractions and then writing decimal fractions into fractions was this, so that we could see that 45 hundredths is this answer, written both ways. And for this particular module, we'll be specifically looking for this. However, we can get there by looking at these as fractions. We'll again do that same thing with this last problem. We're going to take 6/10. I like both of the strategies that I'm showing you on this page as well. 6/10 times 7/10 gives us, when we multiply, remember we multiply everything across the numerators and everything across the denominators. We have 42 hundredths. Or we could write it as a decimal fraction just like this.